Planetfall by L.E. Howe, copyright 2014. Chapter 2. Hypnos 3 to Base 2. Hypnos 3 to Base 2. Respond, please. The almost mechanical repetition of Lieutenant DeSante's voice had an edgy quality to it. He fingered a button on his console, turned two knobs nervously, and tried again. Base 2, this is Hypnos 3, code 41993, alpha phase. Please respond. A faint hiss was the only answer as DeSante paused. He started again. Wait. Birch's interruption was unexpected, and the young lieutenant turned in his seat to look at his commanding officer. After half an hour of fruitless attempts at communication, the words were stabbing into Birch's brain like daggers, and the last thing he wanted was to hear them repeated again. It's obvious we're going to get no response here, he continued. Gray, send out a probe. Let's see what's going on down there. She hesitated for a moment, turned to speak, but seemed to change her mind and turned again to her console. Probe launched, she announced flatly, transmitting within normal parameters. We should hear something in the next 10 minutes. Birch nodded and left his position to look at her screen. Good. That should give us a good sweep of the main control area. Let's see if we can find out what they're up to down there that's keeping them from answering. Dawson? He turned now to address Carla, the young blonde lieutenant to his right. Keep close track of that probe. I want to know as soon as anything happens. The rest of you need to finish the status evaluation of the ship and see what shape this old bucket's in. We don't want the bottom to drop out of it while we're sat here pondering the fate of the universe. Let's get to it. Silence again returned to the room, save for the electronic hum and buzz of the ship. Glancing up from his panel, Birch caught sight of the rusty orb of Mars through the cockpit window. The mute planet seemed to offer a glint of understanding to some unknown mystery, but these were secrets it was unwilling to share. Mars had been the beginning of it all. The belief that humanity could conquer its own limitations, that it could tame the untamable, and that perhaps our living might finally equal our dreaming. And they had done it. They had created a paradise on the crimson soil of cold, cold Mars. But now it was silent. I'm starting to get some preliminary feedback from the probe, Major, Carla's voice cracked. Atmosphere reports at 32% off recommended levels. Breathable, but only just. Something's gone really wrong here. Birch winced. The great achievement of Mars and all other projects that had followed had been built upon the super science of terraforming. If this cornerstone had crumbled and failed, then a whole generation of plans would be doomed. Keep me updated. As soon as anything comes in, let me know. He turned his attention to Jane. How does the ship's status look? Are we in a position to do much here? She shook her head and frowned. Tapping a few more keys, she turned to Birch. It doesn't look good. Take a look for yourself. He moved closer to the screen as she pointed to the scrolling display. Fuel is low, as you'd expect, but the worst news is that the ship's hull is pretty badly damaged and the internal structure's been weakened too. I'm not sure how long it'll last. The ship has been made to do things it was never designed to do, and we're all paying the price right now. Worst of all, it looks like the heat shield on the command module has been damaged. If you remember, our last launch was a mess. That seems to have torn a hole right through the shield. Jane sighed and looked pointedly up at Birch. Basically, we're stuck unless someone comes up and gets us down. Birch stood staring at the monitor as though willing the information to change. It's starting to look like we'll need a better plan than that, though. I'd like you and Lieutenant DeSante to see what you can do about fixing the structure and hull damage. Are the auto repair systems operative? Jane nodded. Somewhat. Some systems are down, though, and I'm not sure there's much material for them to work with after all this time. The self-repair mechanism should have kicked in already if there was. Improvise. Birch pointed to Jane's monitor. It doesn't look like all of this is going to fix itself, and I wouldn't count on some angel of mercy coming to take us home. So we better get to work if we hope to survive. Jane sighed and moved to DeSante's station. As they began their work, Birch looked questioningly at Carla. She shook her head. No news yet from the surface. After an eternity of waiting, these few moments should have seemed as nothing. And yet they appeared to be everything. The future, their future, hung on the events to come, and the waiting seemed to make them weigh heavier still. "I've got something," Carla's voice shattered the silence, and all faces turned to her. "Reports coming in show large developed areas, significant industrial development and infrastructure, intact, but no sign of life." Birch moved quickly to Carla's monitor. "Just buildings." "Can you get a visual on that?" Birch barked. "Let's see what it looks like." Carla nodded, punched in the code to enable the probe's visual display. The screen flickered and the tawny glow of the Martian sky merged with the dusty red of its rock and soil. As the probe shifted position, structures and buildings came into view. All were covered with the same red coating, like rust eating away at the very memory of human aspirations. It was lifeless. The buildings were dilapidated with holes that gaped like open wounds that would never heal. Debris lay in the street, and a harsh wind blew the lifeless orange soil hard against the cowering buildings that would eventually succumb to its bullying. This was the perfect picture of a ghost town of the Old West. But it was a planet. A ghost planet. Something had gone terribly wrong here, and for the first time since this had all begun, Birch was scared. "Is it all like this?" Birch looked at Carla desperately. Her face was blanched. Even in the light of the screen it was obvious. She nodded. "It's all the same. There's nothing there." She paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and tapped again at her console. The display flickered and changed. It was conclusive. This was a dead planet. For a moment everyone stood silent, looking at the screen, then desperately away. Birch's breath hissed through his lips as he hit the console. Whatever lives had been built on the rocky surface below were gone now, and there was nothing left for them here. "We're going on to Base 1, Birch announced. The others looked dumbly at their commander. No one moved. In the stillness of the moment, each face showed varying expressions of shock and grief. There seemed no room for hope. Gray laughed bitterly. Her face was drained bloodless, but her eyes were fiery. Birch recognized the signs. A storm was brewing. Jane Grey served as his co-pilot, and had been as close to a friend as he had found for some years. But that was a long time ago, and the strains of command had built barriers between them. They were adversaries now. Her soft, long black hair and dancing blue eyes belied a bitter streak that ran deep into her soul. Birch had recognized that only recently, but it must have always been a part of her. Now he could feel her animosity rising toward him again. "In a hurry to go, Major?" Jane's voice grew shrill as her seething rage let loose. "Well, hell can wait. I'm through with running. I'm through with doing everything wrong. We've got to stay." The words were hurled like spears, and their echo was left quivering in the wall. "That breaks all protocol," she rasped. "We can't go on until we find out what went wrong here first. If we do, we risk getting there and finding ourselves in a worse position." "A worse position?" Birch spat the words back at her. "What exactly could be worse than this? If Base 1 is finished, then we're all finished, so we may as well get over there and find out if it's our own funeral we mourn here today. I don't care what regulations you want to quote at me, we're not staying. Those old ideas are gone, they're dead, the people who wrote them are dead, but I'm alive and I'm here, and since I command this mission, then this is what we're going to do. Now, if you still want to follow your rotting regulations, then I'll be glad to leave you a spacesuit and an hour's worth of oxygen, and you can stay here. Otherwise, You better get used to the idea that you're going back to Earth because that's where this ship is going. Jane looked to her crewmates for support. Desante shrugged in resignation. Lauren and Carla looked away. Jane rolled her eyes and moved back to her seat. "You're wrong," she hissed. "You've been wrong all along, and now you're going to get us all killed for it." "Maybe," Birch replied bitterly, "but who knows what's right? We've taken on a lot with this mission, and in space you get a real perspective of what we really are. Look around. It's big out here. Big and mean and looking to crush any puny attempt we might make to try and tame it. Maybe this is a punishment for our arrogance, for feeling that we could control this. Maybe we're already dead, we just don't know it yet. When we get back to Earth, then we'll know if we're dead or not. Then we'll know the answer." He looked at Jane and the others. Soon they all would know.